carburetors, man. That's what life is all about.
No, it's not. Welcome back to the laboratory. It's been a while. It's been a long while. I'm still alive, barely. It's been a while since we worked on the GTO, too. So it turns out a couple years ago, our government kind of slipped in a law very quietly and didn't really tell us about it. But it used to be we had ethanol in all our fuel except premium. Premium was pure gasoline. So being carburetors, in the winter, I would make sure that I didn't have any ethanol in the system at all. And they changed the law, and all of a sudden there was ethanol in all fuels. So when I put this thing away for the winter, thinking I had pure gasoline in it, I had ethanol gasoline in it. And in the spring, when I went to fire it up, it ran like absolute hell. It barely made it from the garage into the shop here. And then I did nothing with it all summer. And in the fall, when I went to drive it back to the garage, it wouldn't even start. So the carburetors are completely messed up now. So it's rebuild the Tri-Power time. So if you've never seen the insides of a Rochester 2G carburetor, you're going to see the insides of several of them. So here we go. Step one, remove the carburetors. So the car wouldn't start at all, which leads me to think that the center carb is the one that's got the majority of the problems. I checked all of them, and the front carb and the rear carb, there was fuel coming out of the accelerator pump nozzle, so I know they're getting fuel. The center carb there wasn't, so I suspect the needle and seat on this thing are completely gummed up, that it's not filling. So we're going to start with the center carb. So undo the vacuum line and try and pry it off the gasket so I can reuse the gasket again, and try not to drop any of those washers down the intake. The washers that are impossible to take off when the carburetor is in place. Now you'll notice I've got these phenolic spacers too that I run under the carburetors too. The modern fuel is just horrible when it heats up. It just starts overflowing everything in the carburetor. So anyway, let's start, get this guy on the bench and let's tear into it. All right, so we've got the center carb on the bench here, and full disclosure, this isn't a stock 66 Tri-Power center carb. A little bit of history. In '66, the center carb went to the bigger Rochester 2-barrel throttle body. Previously, the center carb was smaller and the end carbs were bigger. But the actual '66 GTO center carb, while it has a bigger throttle body on it, it had a 1 1/4 inch Venturi in it. So the 65 and 64 center carbs actually had the smaller throttle body on them, but they had a 1 3/16 Venturi. So the smaller throttle body carbs actually flowed a little bit more because the Venturi was bigger. This carburetor is, what is the part number here? 7029118. This carburetor was off a 396 Chevy, and it actually has a 1 3/8 Venturi in it. So this tends to flow a lot more than the factory carb, but from the outside, it looks very much exactly like it. Now the end carbs are both 1 3/8 Venturis. So now with this one, all three of my carbs are 1 3/8 Venturis. So short of porting the carbs, this is as good as you're going to get for flow. So this is one of my little speed secrets with my car. So we are leaking a little bit of fuel here. So that's kind of a good sign, I guess, that fuel got into this thing. I don't know why it wasn't coming out and wouldn't start, but let's start into it and see what's going on inside. Now, I'm kind of anal. I know this screw, I think, is a different length, and I'm not 100% sure about the other ones, so when I take these screws off, I tend to put them, let's get this gasket off. I tend to put them on the workbench in the same pattern that they were on the carburetor, so I know they go back in the exact same holes again. This is where power tools are maybe a good idea. Now, before I take the lid off here too, I should really undo the linkage for the accelerator pump. Okay, so if you can see it, way down here is this tiny little clip that hopefully is not going to go flying when I pry it off. Fortunately, my pliers are magnetic, so we'll put that in the tray so we don't lose it. And we'll pop that link off, so now I can remove, oh, you know what, I need to undo the choke linkage here too, otherwise I'm not going to get the lid off, so this needs to come off too. And then this turns, and there's a slot in it, and that tab fits through the slot, and then the same thing at this end. So now, luckily I'm videotaping this, so I don't have to remember which way the thing goes, because you know I'm going to forget. All right, back to removing the lid. So we're on this screw. When you're rebuilding carburetors, it's a good idea to do this in a well-ventilated area because you're breathing gasoline fumes. Of course, it's the middle of the winter here. Well, I guess not the middle of the winter anymore, but it seems like the middle of the winter because we've been having blizzards every few days here in March. But I need to get my GTO running and cleaned up because it's been invited to the local World of Wheels show in a couple of weeks to be part of the 60th anniversary of drag racing in Manitoba, since my GTO actually has history racing back in the Keystone Bison Dragways days. So need to get it running, need to get it cleaned up, and most importantly, need to get it running. Okay, so there's our last screw, and this one already went flying. So it looks like they're all the same length except for just, yeah, it looks like they're all the same length except for just that one. All right, here's where we're gonna, oh, I still have another screw here that I forgot about. Feel free to fast forward through this part. And that one didn't have a washer on it. Odd. Okay, let me get a dead blow. Okay, we're gonna try this first before we oh, okay, and that worked good. And again, we're gonna try and save the gasket. Oh, and I forgot to undo the vacuum line to the choke pull off. Okay, so that is not the color that you want to see in your carburetor. Yeah, this one's got the light. That's pretty nasty. And we can pull this shaft out and set our float aside and then see if our, okay, well, our needle and seat is not stuck. our accelerator pump looks okay. Our power valve does not look so good. But this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I was expecting a whole bunch of white crusty corrosion. So now the question is, why was I not seeing any accelerator pump shot from this carburetor? So let's get this little clip off the accelerator pump. It's making good noises, but nothing's coming out the nozzle. So yeah, we've got passages that are plugged up, I guess. Okay, so we are going to tear the rest of this thing apart and let it sit in the ultrasonic cleaner for a while. And see if things come back to life. Oops. Okay, so needle looks good. The seat looks like it's all right. A little bit loose. Not so happy about that. Gasket's good. I can see through it. It's all clear. Okay, so we're happy with that. Let's see what our filter looks like inside here. I'm going to need a ginormous wrench for this. So let's go get that. All right, so we've got a 1-inch wrench, and we're going to... That wasn't very tight either. Oh, and this thing doesn't have a filter in there. Okay, so I can't blame that for being plugged either. But that also looks good. Okay, so everything I'm seeing there is good. Well, let's see what the jets look like. I think these are 58s, if I remember right. This is where it's a good thing to write stuff down in your logbook, which of course everybody has for their race car, right? That was close. 57s. Okay, but again, jets are not plugged. I can see clearly through them. So that's good. Let's try and see if we can get this power valve out. Oh, power valve has now unstuck itself. Okay, so that's progress. Before, power valve's got that little plunger thing in there, and when I first opened it up, the plunger was stuck down. And now it's popped itself back up, so it's kind of fixed itself. Maybe, but it's going to go for a ride in the ultrasonic cleaner as well. Seems like I could use a special screwdriver for this with a cutout in the middle. Okay, everything looks good with the power valve now. So anyway, with the power valve stuck, that shouldn't have affected why the thing wouldn't start, and why we're not getting any fuel through the accelerator pump circuit. So let's see what's going on in here. Actually, I've got a few other accelerator pumps I can try as well, and just in case that one is faulty. Now this is a old school leather, if I remember right. Yeah, this is a leather one, so it's not like that's going to have a problem with ethanol, whereas some of the rubber ones will. Okay, these screws are definitely different, so I don't want to mix those ones up. with the air horn screws. Let's see if this is going to come off without a fight. Oh, that's tight. Oh, there's another screw head. Duh. Okay, this screw's probably going to be a different length, I'm guessing. Yeah, that one's short. Okay, now this thing should come out with a bit of persuasion. Okay, so again, everything looks fine, but you know, again, this will go through for a ride through the ultrasonic cleaner. Now, I have drilled these. I forget what these things are called now. Idle air bleeds. I have drilled these out to be a little bit bigger, and in the base plate, I've drilled out the idle passages as well, because that's a pretty big engine. It was, you know, almost 100 cubic inches bigger than what this thing was originally designed for. So this carb has a bit of a custom calibration to it. At this point, if I turn the thing upside down, I should, well, first of all, we should get that horrible gas out of there. And I should see the check ball fall out from in the well for the accelerator pump. So let's get us a little catch basin here. And let's see if it comes out. And there it is. Okay, so there are two check balls. That one that goes in the bottom of that well, so if you can look carefully, maybe you can see in the lower left, that's where that check ball goes. Okay, and then there's going to be another check ball under this spring in here as well. So if I pull this out, it's just a little T-tab, and then there's going to be a spring, and there's going to be another check ball that's going to fall out of there, just like that. Except it didn't. Okay, the spring doesn't want to come out. Let's pull the spring first. Okay, there's our spring, and there's our, I can see the check ball, but it doesn't want to come out, so maybe that's our problem. Maybe that's where everything is plugged in that passage. Okay, so we're going to get something to try and poke in there. Actually, you know what? I'm going to try this and see if that unseats it, and it doesn't. Okay, I'm going to grab another accelerator pump and try pushing it and see if we can get that check ball to unseat. But that is our problem. That check ball is stuck. Look at that. That's what was in there. That's horrible. Okay, all kinds of spare carburetor parts here. Thank my friend Dan for his collection of accelerator pumps. Shall we pick a blue one or a red one? Let's try the red one first. Oh, the red one is good, but it's still not unseating that ball. So we might have to go for a ride in the ultrasonic to try and loosen that ball up, but yeah, that didn't work. Okay, so at this point, we're going to take the throttle body off, and then we can put the main body in the ultrasonic cleaner. And oh yeah, different screwdriver. This is a Phillips screwdriver now. These screws are usually crazy tight too, but that one wasn't bad. This carb was freshly rebuilt when I bought it, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, so everything seems to be coming apart quite easily. The end carbs, I've rebuilt them a couple of times already too, so all of that stuff should come apart as well. And again, let's see if we can't save that gasket in case we need to reuse it. Okay, so there's our throttle body, and there's our throttle body screws. I can throw them on the throttle plate now knowing that they're not going to fall into the engine because the carb's not on the engine. Normally that wouldn't be a good place to put your screws. Okay, we'll pull off this vacuum plug. And at this point, this thing can go for a ride in the ultrasonic cleaner. So let's do that. All right, I took our body and I hosed it down with carb cleaner, because it's a carburetor, not brakes, and let it sit upside down for a while, and our little check ball actually fell out, so we're good. And now I almost lost it. There it is. So I'm going to run this through the ultrasonic cleaner anyway. The carb cleaner did a pretty good job of it. I just did a test with another carb, and this thing was like black, filthy. And you know, a couple of runs and a bit of toothbrushing through the ultrasonic cleaner with some pine sol in there, and it came out like it's absolutely brand new. So we're going to give this thing a few minutes in the bath as well. So we'll set this for 480 seconds, and put our lid on it, and away it goes. And we'll let that run through its cycle. We'll pull it out, and we'll give it a bit of toothbrushing if there's any dirt still stuck on there, and run it through one more cycle, and after that I think it's going to be pretty good. But our check ball came out, so we're happy with that. That was the important thing. So while the main body is in the ultrasonic, I started cleaning up the base plate, and I discovered that the carb cleaner actually started taking the paint off of this. So rather than painstakingly disassemble everything, pull the throttle shafts out, mask all of that stuff, we're going to use a brush and this nozzle is plugged, of course, because they always are. Let's go grab another can. And our furnace just fired up too, so that's going to make all kinds of noise. This might take a couple of attempts, but again, it's way quicker and easier than masking everything. I think I need to shake the paint a little bit more. Anyway, you get the idea, so I'm going to be doing this for a few minutes. All right, we've got our main body cleaned up. It looks like brand new. We ran the boosters and all of the small parts through the ultrasonic as well. Everything cleaned up. It looks really good. Paint is still kind of drying on the base plate, so we're going to set that aside and we're going to start reassembling our main body. So here was the check ball from hell. So that goes into that hole there, like that. This was the spring that came out, and it's broken. I don't know where the other half went, but luckily I had a spare spring, so that goes in next. And then our little T-shaped retainer goes into those slots like that. And it's going to be held down when the booster assembly goes in there too, so it's not like that's going to be able to fall out. Speaking of which, let's put in our booster assembly. So I cleaned up all the old gaskets. I've got so many spare parts, but I don't have spare gaskets. Well, I've got lots of spare gaskets, but they're not the ones that actually are the ones that fit. So yeah, make sure I grab the right screws here now. So these were the screws for the booster. And that one. I've got my gloves off now too, because the fingers on the gloves were getting a little bit longer from the brake clean, if you know what I mean. So now that I'm done with all the toxic chemicals and everything is perfectly clean, I don't need the gloves anymore. So we'll cinch that up. Okay, we'll put the power valve in next. So again, this went through the cleaner and it looks good now. So that goes down into that hole there. Let's turn the light on here so maybe you can see it a little bit better. Power valve goes in there. So we'll fumble around and try and get that started without cross-threading it, which I just did. So we'll give it a better attempt. Okay, and now that it's unstuck, I can just squeeze it down with a screwdriver and tighten it up. Okay, the jets, which were, what did we say, 67s, and I had tuned this thing with a wideband, so I was completely happy with that. Now, trying to get the jets in is always a bit of a challenge, so I found that this little tool from a vacuum pump works great because you can stick it in the jet and it allows you to get it started in the threads. And then you chase it in the rest of the way with the screwdriver. Like that. Do the same thing with the other one. Get it started. Chase it in, make sure they're snug. Okay, and at this point, our other check ball can go down into the accelerator pump well, and it just goes down into the hole that you see there, so we'll just drop it down and then we'll pinball it until it falls into the right hole, like that. And the spring goes in. Make sure that that's centered in the pocket down there, like that. The accelerator pump actually gets attached to the air horn. So at this point, we've got everything on the main body, and we'll just set it aside, and now we'll reassemble the air horn. So the air horn didn't go through the ultrasonic cleaner. I just ran some carb cleaner around on it, and it cleaned up pretty good to me, but there's no critical passages on the air horn anyway, other than the fuel inlet. But fuel inlet I blew out, so that's all good. And we'll put the seat in here. Again, this went through the ultrasonic cleaner, but it looked pretty good. Snug that up a bit tighter than it was last time. And the needle, which looks really good, so we'll stick that back in there. And then the float. I'm a big fan of brass floats, so that's what we're going to use again. As soon as I get the shaft to align, like that. Okay, and then I decided I was going to put a new accelerator pump in. I don't know, the leather's looking a little bit old on that one, so we're going to try the new one and see how it does. So we'll stick that in there, and then we've got the little clip that holds it in place. Just like that. Okay, and at this point, we're going to grab our gasket that I cleaned up, put it on the right way. Make sure our spring is in the center for our accelerator pump. We should probably check the float level. Check the drop. That looks good. And then check it this way. There's a spec for this stuff. And if I remember right, that looks good too. So at this point we'll line up our accelerator pump. Oh yeah, gasket needs to go on the lid. I've rebuilt these carbs so many times and I get this wrong every single time. I don't know why, but so gasket goes on the lid first, like that, and then we put our float in. Okay, let's try this again. So we're going to make sure our accelerator pump goes straight, smooth in there. And you can feel the spring pushing back on it, so that's good. Okay, at this point, we can start putting, so that was a long screw, and then the rest of them are all the same length. Put the screws back in. Oh yeah, and the one with the tag goes in the corner here. So the early carburetors didn't have the part number stamped on them like this one. They had tags on them. So I already explained that this isn't an original 66 Tri-Power carburetor. It's a big 1 3/8 Venturi later model carburetor, so it's got the part number stamped in it, but I'm trying to pass it off as an original 66 GTO Tri-Power carburetor, so we've got a carb tag on it to make it look right. But if there's experts out there and they see the part number on the side of this thing, then they'll know it's not the right carburetor, but 99 out of 100 people are going to walk right by it and not notice that. And the goal of my GTO was always to make it look as stock as absolutely possible, but try and get it to run 11s, and well, I totally overshot that goal, so now the new goal is to try and make it run 10s, because we're pretty close, but we'll see what happens this summer. Okay, one more time around, just snug everything up, make sure I'm not forgetting any of them. I don't like fuel leaks. The paint on the engine doesn't like fuel leaks. The environment doesn't like fuel leaks. And the women folk don't like the smell of fuel. Okay, so at this point we need to put the choke rod back on. The accelerator pump rod will go on. Man, that spring is stiff. Wow. That'll go on when we put the base plate on. I'm going to let the paint dry on that thing for a little bit yet. But we can certainly put the choke rod in. So if I remember right, it went this way. I don't know, might have to go back and look at the video again if I got this wrong, but wow, the magnet is strong in that thing. That's like that, and then that screw, and this is like a shoulder bolt screw, so you can tighten it all the way down, and it's got a shoulder on there that this thing can still rotate on. Okay, and we've got the clip here, which is for the accelerator pump rod. So looking around, we don't have any spare parts. This was for the vacuum port on the bottom here. I'll put that back before we forget. The fuel inlet, we can put that back on. Let's see if we get the orientation in the same direction again. That was the cardboard breaking, not the carburetor. So there we go. Other than waiting for the base plate paint to dry, that is our freshly rebuilt center carb, and it looks like the pine sol took some of the color off the main body. Maybe I had it a little bit too strong in there, but anyway, the carb looks like brand new. So hopefully, when we bolt it back on, it works properly. So we'll let that paint dry. We'll stick that back on, and then we'll pull the front and the rear carburetors off and open them up and see how bad they look. But this one is almost done. It's another day. So I got the base plate back on the center carb, got all the choke linkage and everything reassembled, and this one's pretty much done, ready to go. So I've got one of the end carbs off here. I'm not going to bore you with going through all of the details again on the end carbs, but I just wanted to show you the difference between the center carb and the end carbs. End carbs are really, really simple. They just have, they've still got an accelerator pump. They've got the float, needle, and seat, like all carburetors. They've got the booster venturis. But there's no power valve. There's no choke. There's no idle circuit in them. So they're really, really simple carburetors. So they're just main jets accelerator pump, and of course the float. Now, because there's no idle circuit in these things, it's critical that the throttle body on this absolutely seals. Like, there's no room for air leaks here at all. There's no idle screw adjustment. So there's actually some sealant that goes into the venturis to make sure that the throttle blades actually seal completely and there's no vacuum leak with the end carbs. If you got a Tri-Power and you're struggling with idle issues, check your end carbs to see if they're leaking air past the throttle bodies. If they are, then chances are that's what's causing some of your problems. Okay, so this one's got gunge in it. It's going to go through the ultrasonic as well. We're going to pull it all apart. Now with the center carb, I kind of glossed over the float level setting really quickly. And I wanted to point out that if you've got a brass float, it's different than if you got a plastic float, the procedure for measuring it. With the brass float, you measure from the bottom side of this seam to the gasket surface. So if you can see it, I've got the mark highlighted there at 19:30 seconds, and that's pretty close to where we want to be. It's going to take a tiny little bend on here to get this exactly where it needs to be. And then for the float drop, we're doing the same thing. Here we're checking this now to the bottom of the float. So here again against the gasket surface. So the float drop on this one is perfect. The float top setting here needs a tiny little tweak because we're about, I don't know, 1 or 2 30 seconds a bit too low. So we'll fix that up. We'll go through this. We'll clean this one up. We'll do this with the other end carb as well. Get it all back together. Hopefully it fires up and runs. One other thing I forgot to mention too is, besides the float level adjustment, if we go back to the center carb, there is an adjustment. Get your specs out from your carb kit and read them. There's an adjustment on this vent. There's an adjustment on the choke. There's an adjustment on the choke pull-off. Now with my car, because the heat crossover in the intake manifold is blocked, I don't really have a choke, and it's quasi-race car, so we don't choke anyway. So I'm not going to worry about the choke adjustment. But if you need to choke, make sure you adjust everything properly. The other key thing is the accelerator pump rod here. So this rod pops in to our throttle lever there, and for the Tri-Power, unless you're at Denver altitude, you're in the first hole. And there is a spec for where this is supposed to sit. And if we check this with our gauge, that's supposed to be sitting, let me make sure that, this is hard to do with, and show you on the camera too, but we lay the gauge across the air horn, and then we measure down to the top of the rod, and it's at 24 or 30 seconds, which is 3/4 of an inch, which is exactly what the spec is supposed to be. If it wasn't right, then you go and you bend that rod until you get that to the right position. That's fundamentally important if you want to eliminate any tip-in bogs to get the accelerator pump set right. So let's get the last carb done and let's get this engine running. All right, we got everything all put back together, and we cleaned up the engine. We cleaned up the engine compartment for the car show, so it looks a little bit more presentable. So I'm going to run the electric fuel pump now and just make sure that we don't have any leaks in the fuel lines. And if that's all good, then we'll try and start it. So, oops. Turn on the fuel pump. Okay, and we could hear the pump laboring, so we know we've got pressure built up. So let's look for any leaks. Okay, everything looks good there. Let's have a look down the carbs, make sure things aren't overflowing. And it looks good. Let's check to make sure we've got accelerator pump in all 3 carburetors. Okay, we got squirt there. We got squirt there. We got squirt there. Okay, I think we'll try and fire this thing up. All right, I got my shop coat on because it's getting cold in here. I got the door open so we don't die of fumes, but we got fuel where the fuel is supposed to be. So at this point, we should be able to turn the key and this thing should fire up. So let's give it a shot. All right, well, no choke, so it's going to run rough for the first little while. So once it came off the high idle cam, it didn't have enough heat in it to keep going. But anyway, we got it up and running, so we'll call this done. So this video went way longer than I thought it was going to, so if you stuck around until now, thanks. As usual, like, comment, subscribe, all of that stuff. And until next time, be kind and be humble. And we'll see you next time.